Evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Zevachim, Daf Ayin Ches, and we're starting at a Mishnah on the bottom of Ayin Zayin Amud Beis, um, 4 lines from the bottom. That Mishnah reads as follows: Dam shenis arev b'mayim. Let's say that you have dam, you have blood that you need to do a zrikas hadam with, but it gets mixed up with water. So im yesh bo maris dam, if when you look at the mixture of water and blood, it looks like blood, kasher. Now, the Gemara doesn't detail how much red is red. That we don't know, but it does, at least not from here. You need Rishonim for that. But here, it seems to be that as long as it looks like blood, you're good to go. Next, nisare beyayin. What about you have? Remember, their wines were thick and viscousy. They're not like our wines are watered down. So there's when they drank it, they were mosaic a little bit. But let's say you had blood and wine, very hard to distinguish between the two. So dam shenisar, nisar beyayin. So roin oso ki'ilu humayim. We look at it, we look at it as though it is in water. So basically, we're taking the wine and calling it water. We'll speak about this a little bit more. So it's the same measure. If blood is mixed with water, or if blood is mixed with wine, we make the same umdana. We make the same assessment that had this volume of water, had this volume of blood been mixed in that volume of water, then we would make an assessment. If it's still red, then you're good to go. And if not, then not. Nisarev, let's say you had blood of a korban, but it got mixed up bidam behema o bidam hachaya. Rashi points out shel chulin. So you have a holy animal that you did korban and you're ready to do zrika, but it gets mixed up with the blood of a behema or a chaya. Roan oso ki'ilu humayim. Same as before. We look at the blood, the receiving blood, namely the blood of the chulin behema or chulin chaya, and we say it's water. And what would have happened if it would have? Okay, then that's how we would look at it. Turning to the top of Ayin Ches Amud Aleph, Rabbi Yehuda Omer ein dam mevatel dam. Very interesting halacha. You're not allowed to have blood get nullified. So that means, let's say I have blood in my container. I'm holding it in my right hand. It's blood for Zrikas Hadam. And there's 5 ounces. And I dump it by accident into a vat of 1,000 ounces of blood. Ein dam mevatel dam. You're not able to nullify blood. It's not nullifiable. Same min. We're going to discuss that already at the end of the daf today. But it is the same min. But ein dam mevatel dam, it's a unique din. And the kedusha shabo, it's always going to remain that way. So whatever the volume of blood is, you have to do zrikas hadam. What if the blood of our korban was nisare b'dam psulin? What if it got mixed up with an animal that was puzzle? We haven't discussed puzzle yet. We've discussed chulin. So it says the Gemara, yishafech la'ama. That gets poured into the water chamber that ran under the floor of the Beis Hamikdash, and it let out by the Gichon, I think was where it ended up, because the whole story is there, which we learned about. Okay, fine. What if we are talking about bedam hatamtzis? We know that the zrikas hadam is from the dam hanefesh. That's the blood that spurts out post shchita, the strong, forceful spurts of blood, and it gets mixed up with the dam hatamtzis. That's the slow-flowing blood after the dam hanefesh. So it says the Gemara, yishafech la'ama, that too gets spilled out in the aqueduct. It flows out, and says the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer machshir. Rabbi Eliezer says no. No. That's fine. Blood of the dama nefesh mixed with dama tamsis is totally fine. Im lo nimlach v'nosan kosher. And if he wasn't paying attention and he already gave the blood and he already used the dama tamsis, it's kosher. That is going back on the shita of the Tanakama who says yishafech le'ama. Let's open with the Gemara here. 4 lines down. Ayin Ches Amud Aleph. Amar Reb Chia bar Abba, Amar Reb Yochanan. Lo shanu, the first halacha, that if it gets mixed with water, ela shenaflu mayim lesoch dam. If water spills into the blood, that's when we have the parameter of the Mishnah that im yesh bo maris dam kosher, that if it appears that way, then it is. However, if it's the reverse, aval nafal dam lesoch mayim, if you have a container that's water and you're pouring blood, the zrikas hadam blood, into the water, then we don't have our din of the Mishnah, rishon batel, because every drop of water, every drop of blood that falls into the water becomes batel to the water right away, even though it may have a maris of dam. It's possible that it'll look that way, but because each blood Each blood droplet becomes batel when it lands. So therefore, this is the knech. This is a taich on our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that it's only going to be considered kosher if water falls into blood. But if blood falls into water, it's always going to be batel with each drop. The poskim have a fascinating kula like this in regards to using ice on Shabbos. So one of the concerns of ice is that if you have ice which is in a solid state and at room temperature, it will slowly drip into a liquid state. That might be nolad or molid according to Rashi, different lashonos in the Gemara Maseches Shabbos. So what do the poskim say? I do this at home. If you have an ice container, put a little bit of water on the bottom. Why? Because that way, for the first droplet of ice that comes down as water, it's batel into the water. And the second droplet, the same. So then that water is not muksa when you're done, because every droplet was batel to the liquid beneath it. Same thing here. What we're saying over here is that if the blood of a korban is poured into a cup of water, since each droplet becomes batel, then even if at the end it looks blood red, even if it's 99% water, but everything's batel to the water, so it's water, even though it looks like blood. So that's the first knech that we see in our Gemara, Rav Chia bar Abba. Amar Rav Papa, ule'inyan kisui eno kain. When it comes to the mitzvah of kisui adam that applies by birds and applies by chayes, applies by certain animals, that mitzvah of kisui adam, so then we don't say rishon batel. In other words, if we have blood and the blood gets poured into the water, you're right, you can't use rikas adam with it anymore because now it's water. But as it relates to kisui adam, it's blood. And you have to make sure that you cover it. So again, we're splitting a hair. We're saying that really our Mishnah, as we talk about Zrikas Adam, it's only going to be kosher if the water was poured into the blood, but not vice versa. But when it comes to Kisui Adam, we're always going to be makbid that it requires Kisui Adam. Why? Lefisha ein dichui b'mitzvos. That's fascinating. We don't have time for this, but isn't Zrikas Adam a mitzvah? What is it? What does ein dichui b'mitzvos mean? Okay, very good. Not for now. All right, next Gemara. Amar Reish Lakish. Ha-pigul v'ha-nosar. We have to remove the word tameh, ayin, in the meforshim over here on the side, and that goes with tzionim for a whole Torah here in the Rishonim. So it says Gemara, in a case of pigul v'nosar, shebalalan zeva achlam. So I have pigul, I had a machshavas pigul, chutz lizmano, and I have nosar, I passed the expiration date, and they're both in my cholent, pieces of meat mixed in the cholent. And I have two of those pieces in my mouth as I'm chewing them. The halacha is your pater. Your pater from malkos. You're not pater from the isra b'achila, but you're pater from malkos. Why? Because efshar shelo yarbe min al chaveiro vivadlenu. At some point, there's going to be a majority of one type of food over another. Not every piece of meat is cut equal. So as you're chewing, one of the pieces of food is going to be the majority. It'll be mavatil the other. So it says the Gemara from this little quip of the Gemara of Reish Lakish, Shma mina tlas. There are three things that we can learn from this. Number one, Shma mina isurin mevatlin zeh. Number one, pigul can be mevatel nosar can be mevatel pigul. You're right. It's a good point. I never really thought about it. Can you be mevatel? When we talk about bittel, we're like, I put milchiks and the thing, I didn't realize I'm fleishik. Is there bittel? This is talking about two isurim. Can nosar be mavatel? Can pig be mavatel nevela? Whatever the case may be. The answer is yes, that we have isurim that are mavatel zeh. And the second thing we learn, and this is actually what we're going to be talking about for the remainder of the day, ushma mina nosein tam berov lav de oraisa. When you have nosein tam against another item, it's lav de oraisa. Nosein tam is not a din de oraisa. The Gemara is going to question this shortly. Ushma mina, lastly, why is it that you don't get malkos? Because hasras safek lo shma hasra. I hereby warn you that if you eat this pigul, you're going to be chayiv malkos. Yeah, but I have nosar in my mouth too. Oh, so it's a safek. So if it's a safek, and I gave you hasra and you're not chayiv malkos, it must be that safek hasra is lo shma safek, or hasra safek is lo shma hasra. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. No saying tam is not a din d'oraisa. No saying time is definitely a din d'oraisa. Bottom of Ayin Chesem at Aleph, 4 lines from the bottom. Masiv Rava. We have a brisa that it's actually a Mishnah from Maseches Chala. Asa isa min chitin umin orez. So I have a mixed flour. Part of the flour that I use for my challah this week, or for my matzah, was made from wheat flour. One of the chameshes minei dagan. And you can only make matzah from the chameshes minei dagan. Rice, matzah, is a 0. They're shehakol. They don't count for matzah on Pesach. You have to pay attention to the box that you buy in the store because they sell a lot of different kinds of matzah. If someone can only eat rice matzah, I'm sorry, you're not yotzei. That means you're just not yotzei. It's not the right grain. So one of my grains is chitin, but the other one is umin ores. So says the Gemara, Im yesh ba ta'am dagan chayebes bechala v'afal gav deruba ores. Oh, your chayiv chala, 25% of the flour is wheat, 75% of the flour is ores. But if it tastes like wheat, you're chayiv and chala. What do we see from here? That no saying tam is a din d'oraisa. Says the Gemara, no, only midrabanan. Says the Gemara, I promise you that's not true. Ihachi, if what you're saying is true, that it's only the Rabbanan, go ahead and explain the next line. Ema Seifa, Adam Yotze b'Pesach. Okay, now this is like, you can't fight with this one. If you have 25% chitin, and you have 75% ores, and you make matzah out of that, and it tastes like wheat, you can be Yotze, the mitzvah d'oraisa of matzah. Don't tell me that no Saint Tam isn't a din d'oraisa. Pashut, it's a din d'oraisa. Turning to the top of Ayin Ches Amud Beis, we'll be stopping Emir Tashem at the top of Ayin Tes Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, Ella, we have to make a split. Min b'she'eno mino. When we talk about two items that are mixed together that are not the same. Let's use the example of chitin and ores. We have flour, wheat flour, and rice flour. They're not the same. In that case, b'taima, we follow tam. Then we say that tam is a din d'oraisa. But min bimino beruba. But when it comes to regular min bimino, so wheat flour and wheat flour, one is tame, one is not tame, whatever the case scenario, blood and blood. So then we would say beruba. So that's the distinction of the Gemara. And it helps us with what we're talking about because we were a little bit stuck. Our case was pigul v'nosar. Well, guess what? Those are both kinds of meat. They don't necessarily taste any differently, right? So that's how the Gemara makes its distinction. Says the Gemara, I'm going to show you that this is not so simple. Unisha, this is difficult. Ayin Ches Amud Beis, second line. Unishaer min bimino. We should treat a case of min bimino, which we just said was based on rov. We should treat it kimin b'she'eno mino, like a case of, let's say, the chitin and the orez, where we said it's based on tam. Why? Because it's 9. We have a Mishnah. Our Mishnah. Nis'are b'yayin, if blood of a korban gets mixed up with wine, roan oso, we look at seemingly the wine, roan oso ki'ilu humayim, we look at the wine as though it is water. Okay? My lab, roan oso liyayin ki'ilu humayim, isn't it that when you say the case of nis'are b'yayin, that we're roan oso, we look at it like water, isn't that then talking about changing wine, changing our perception of that wine to water? And what does that therefore teach us? That we switched a case of min bimino. We assume blood and wine are the same. How did we treat it? Based on rov, right? Remember what we said about blood into water is that we're just basing it on majorities. Says Gemara, lo, that's not correct. Rather, roan oso ledam ki'ilu humayim. No. When it says roan oso, it's that we treat the blood like water, and that's totally different. Rashi, a third of the way down, the Ramaska lo roan oso ledam ki'ilu humayim upasil de batel beruba. That is going to be considered batel bero. When we're talking about the wine, we're not talking about the water. Says the Gemara, ihachi, then it shouldn't have said what it said. It should have said batel mi baile. We should have had a language of bittel, not a language of roan oso ki'ilu humayim. We shouldn't have had that language. It should have said batel. Ve'odin furthermore, Tanya, we have a brisa. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, roan oso ki'ilu hu yayin edom. We look at it as though it is red wine. Im diha mar'ehu kasher. If the color lightens, then it's kasher. Being lav, then it's going to be puzzle. And what we see clearly from here is that we look at the wine and we don't look at the blood. That was how we tried to touch up the Gemara a little bit earlier from our Mishnah. So says the Gemara, which one is it? And the Gemara responds, Tanoihi. Really, we have a fundamental machlokes Tanoim in this area. Almost halfway down to Tanya. Let's talk about a unique case of Tuma. Dili, we have a pitcher that's Tameh. And I want to go tovel that pitcher that's Tameh. However, sheyesh bo yayin lavan o chalav. Inside the pitcher that I want to tovel, there's stuff inside of it. There's white wine or milk. And I take it into the kelim mikvah with the white wine in it or with the milk. The halacha is holchen achar harov. As long as there's a rov, we're good to go. Rabbi Huda Omer, roen oso ki'ilu hu yayin edom. We actually look at the white wine as though it's red wine, like we saw earlier. Im dihemar ehu kasher ve'im lav pasal. So these are the two different shitas. We have the Tanakama, who says we follow rov, and then we have Rabbi Huda, who says that we follow im dihemar ehu, just the coloring. Says the Gemara or Minhi, we have a brisa that's not so comfortable with what we just learned from this brisa that we just saw from Mikvos. Delishu male roken, if there's a picture that's filled with saliva, vihit bilo ki'ilu lo taba. Saliva is very viscous, and we assume therefore that if there is saliva on a kli, that part of the kli did not have contact with the water in the mikvah. L'chora, it's not good. Meiraglayim, which is not viscous, it's like water. Ki'ilu, it's like water. Roen oso ki'ilu hein mayim. What happens if you have water inside a kli? So there's a principle called hashaka, and we use this in our mikvahs all the time. Our mikvah water is connected by a tube to a basin of rainwater, and there's just hashaka. The waters have to touch, and it's as if we're in the rainwater. Same thing here. Urine, mei raglayim, is very liquidy. So therefore, if that were to have been in the container, that's the same thing as the mikvah at that point, because once the water touches it, the mikvah water touches the mei raglayim, hashaka, it's all water at that point, no problem at all. What if, says the Gemara, it's male mechatas, that the deli, the pitcher that's tameh, is filled with mechatas from the para aduma. So ad sheyirbu hamayim al mechatas. We need to have a rov in this case. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Man shamas le de isle roin Rabbi Yehuda. We know that from the previous Mishnah, from Mikvaos and from our Mishnah as well, that Rabbi Yehuda holds of roin. Yet, what do we see in this brisa with no argument from Rabbi Yehuda? The Ktani, the Sagi leberuba. We just said that rov works for mechatas. Where's Rabbi Yehuda? We should have seen him arguing. It should be rov versus roin, but we don't see him talking. So we're going to end with this answer of Abaye, and then we'll stop 4 lines down. Amar Abaye lo kasha. This is not a stira within the world of Rabbi Yehuda, because hadidei hadirabbe. One was talking about the shita of Rabbi Yehuda himself, and one was talking about the shita of his Rebbe, Rabban Gamliel. How does this play out? Ayin Tes Amud Aleph on the top of the page. Tanya, we have a brisa. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, and look what he says. Mishum Rabban Gamliel. So yes, Rabbi Yehuda, the Talmud, is quoting, but he's not saying his own shita. He's quoting his Rebbe. What does his Rebbe hold? Ein dam mevatel dam, ein rok mevatel rok, ein me raglain mevatlin me raglain. That's not his shita. So when you see in the brisa that there's nothing pushing back against rov, that must be his Rebbe. But he himself holds, in fact, that we would employ the lenient approach of rowan. We just look and we see what it looks like. If it looks like wine, it's wine. If it doesn't look like wine, it's not wine. Tomorrow night, Mir Hashem, we'll pick up with the answer of Rava. We'll stop right here on the top of Ayin Tes Amud Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.